Hey everybody, welcome back to Therapist Theater. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA, and every week a guest therapist, counselor, or social worker joins me in the theater to talk about a movie that we've seen and what relationships or mental health issues it highlights. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes, and while you're doing that, help other people find the show by giving it a 5-star rating and writing a review for it in the podcast app. You can also stay connected with what's happening in the theater by following us on social media. Links to our accounts are in the show notes. This week's guest is Valerie Martin. Valerie is a therapist, yoga teacher, psycho-spiritual mentor, and podcaster based in Nashville, Tennessee. She's a Ravenclaw, Enneagram 7, anti-racist ally, anti-diet vegan, animal advocate, and work that reconnects facilitator in training. Her fanatical obsessions include moss, trees, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and buying more books than she could ever read. Let's get this show started, shall we? Dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Valerie, how are you today?
I'm pretty good.
Awesome. I am so excited that you're here. I've been looking forward to this. Welcome to the theater. I'd love to ask you to start out. If you could tell me a little bit before you began participating in therapy, like if your first at-bat was as a client or if it was going to grad school, before you were doing that, what was your concept of what therapy or counseling was?
Yeah, I wish that I could go back and interview my 8-year-old self about that question because my memory from childhood is fuzzy. I tend to say I have the memory of a goldfish. And for instance, movies, I retain plots, maybe maximum 2 years. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I know that my aunt, when I was maybe middle school age, my aunt went to grad school to become a therapist. And I do have this memory of uh, what became sort of an inside joke in our family. And we even got little canoe ornaments and with little fishing lures and little 6-packs of beer in them because she had in one of her training videos, I think it was in a couples therapy class or something, this woman who said, "I worked my butt off to keep him in bear and fishing lures." And that just became sort of an inside joke. And yeah, I was always obsessed with this concept of personal growth, probably before I even had the terms for that. I was, getting all these little tween and journal books and things that had all these reflection questions. So I was always really in that world from as soon as I knew that existed.
Huh. That's interesting. Because I don't think I was self-aware till my 30s. What do you think it what do you think it was that kind of sparked that in you?
Oh, it's a great question. I mean, I don't know. I think sometimes what would I be doing if I didn't do this? And I love writing and I'm into kind of marketing stuff. But I'm I don't have other skills. Thank goodness this is a thing because it's just, it's just what I'm drawn to. And I don't know other than just that innate sort of curiosity. I'm very much an existential thinker. And so just always thinking about sort of the nature of life and being a human on the planet.
Wow. Do you feel like you had, I don't know what the right word is, an ability, a talent, an attraction to connecting with yourself and exploring your interior from an early age?
Yeah, definitely. And even though, like I said, my childhood is fuzzy, I do have some journals even from like early years, like 10, 11, 12 years old, that I found not even that long ago, and just kind of looking through, and like I'm writing about my religious beliefs and like my questions about life, and I'm just like, whoa, okay, it's a little
Wow.
intense, but yeah.
I don't mean this as a joke. But I want to ask, like, did you how social were you when you were a
Mm.
kid? Did you have a lot of interaction with others, or were you on the alone side?
I did actually. I was around my friends a lot, and I was like the weird one. Like that was, they would all say that. But I was also my brother, who's 3 years older than me. Like we were like probably the first house in the neighborhood that had like a personal computer. He is now a video game developer slash works in, DNA forensics and all this stuff. And um so even though I was like wearing glitter, became a cheerleader, all of that kind of stuff, I was also kind of a nerd. And I was like building Spice Girls websites and all of that from like 11, 12 years old. So, and meeting people from Canada in ICQ chat rooms. And my other friends probably thought that was super weird, but that's just kind of, I enjoyed my real life friends, but I also loved the computer.
Huh. Okay. That's it's just really interesting. I think I would, and this is probably a bias, would
Yeah.
think, with kids, kind of a binary kind of thing. Like you're either kind of comfortable plumbing the depths of your interior, or, you kind of go that social kind of out way. And that's probably because I tended to lean more towards the solitude side
Hmm.
when I was a kid. So it's probably a bias on my part. Let me ask you this. Why therapy now? Like, why do you do what you do now?
Yeah. I think, kind of the classic wounded healer archetype, like many of us get here by nature of our own journeys. Um, in fact, I would be a little scared if someone came to therapy never having experienced it at all. That
Mm,
would be a little strange, but to each their own, I guess. So I had an eating disorder in high school and early college, and at the time, like, didn't really fully understand what was going on with that. And some of it I learned in the process of starting therapy in high school, and then some of it I think I didn't understand more fully until I was much more mature and had started kind of learning things professionally in the field. But I did get to a point in my recovery in college where I was like, oh my goodness, like I have a healthier relationship with my body and with food than most women I know who've never even had an eating disorder. Like, I want more people to have this. So, after working in marketing for a few years after undergrad, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And, started off with that very kind of like narrowly focused goal of working with eating disorders, and it just expanded out from there, especially as my own kind of life experiences have expanded.
wow. So do you feel like through your own therapy, your own recovery, that this might be my way of conceptualizing it, that you received a gift that you wanted to give to others?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. So you got into therapy to give others what you received. I was thinking earlier, I wonder how your concept of therapy has changed from the time before you engaged in it to now. It Can you answer that if you don't really remember what that concept
Mm.
was very much?
I mean, I don't know. Uh I remember having a good experience with my first therapist in high school. I just don't know if I had a whole lot of like, what did I expect from that? I don't know.
Mhm.
But and perhaps it's pretty telling of like, I can't remember anything, frankly, that we talked about in those sessions. I mean, I know we obviously talked about like food and my eating disorder, but I remember I did not dread going.
Hmm.
This woman was like probably close to my parents' age, but I remember her demeanor, and I remember just like I know that I got things out of that. And I think to me that that kind of like circles back to how I want to work with people. Like it's, we know that the research shows the relationship is what's most important. So as much as I like to nerd out on like learning different interventions and
Hmm.
things like that, like ultimately I want to show up, I want to be human, I want to relate. And it's not just like, not in the same way that a friend would necessarily, but just being that safe, steady presence, where people can navigate through messy stuff that they might not do in other relationships.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, even if you don't remember what you guys talked about, if you remember how you felt in the room.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I definitely felt that kind of like, and I can even just kind of sense and remember this woman's sort of like dry humor. And I'm sure that like my 15-year-old self really appreciated that.
Uh,
um, yeah.
do you, what has surprised you, or so I'm going to use two words for it. I'm going to say surprised and challenged, because I'm thinking that one is like a good version, one is a negative version, about moving from the client's couch to the therapist chair.
Mm. What has surprised me? Um, I mean, I think there's just so many interesting aspects of the work that we do. Like in some ways it's, it's just organic conversation. In other ways, like you're managing the experience. You have that sort of like what third ear or whatever. Um you're practicing attunement, you're managing the time, you're like zooming out to this person's like overall case conceptualization, so you're not getting lost in whatever kind of story or narrative that they might be lost in the moment. So there's just so many moving parts, and I think in the beginning I was super intimidated by that, of like, oh my god. And like, especially thinking back to some of the first like process groups that I did as an intern, where it's like, all right, it's a 2-hour group, free form, like let's do this with people who are in like residential level of care and complex diagnoses. And I was just terrified and like, can I just bring a plan? Can I bring an outline with, and it's nice to have an outline, and it's nice to have things in your back pocket that you can do, but to also trust the process, and just know that that creativity, it's very improvisational, and that's like a big part of the fun and the magic of doing this
Mhm.
work.
Yeah, but I think, at least on my part, you have to know all of that stuff
Yeah.
in order to be able to improvise and be present. It's a bit
Yeah,
like jazz.
definitely.
Like if you don't know music theory, you can't play jazz, because then you can't know how to break the rules if you don't know them.
Hmm.
So that sounds like maybe something that was a challenge. Has anything surprised you? Kind of surprise and delight, I guess you could say?
Hmm. I mean, it's hard for me to think off the top of my head. I'm just thinking, I guess, about how powerful some moments can be, and like that often though, those are not things that like I'm making happen, right? I
Mhm.
mean, I'm maybe facilitating it, but even like during EMDR sometimes, like, Jesus shows up or somebody shows up, and it's like, I mean, if I've ever had a mystical experience, like it's some of them that I can think of are in those moments. And I think,
Mm.
just being surprised at how real and powerful that can be. And that's when I'm like, ooh, that's when it kind of becomes like a psycho spiritual thing of like, what is working with me here? Because that was definitely not just me. I mean, it was the client, and it
Mhm.
was their life experience and their beliefs informing all of that. But those moments where just like magic happens, I think it's surprising and not at the same time, because it's like
Mhm.
now I know that those things are possible. um but I think the first few times that that happens is like, whoa.
Yeah, it's so strange, because I think, because I went through my own therapy as a client before I became a therapist, and so I think, as a client, you have had those yourself, but then to sit on the other side of it, and to have this knowledge inside of yourself that these things are possible, but then in the moment you're like, I didn't wave a wand. Like I didn't really like, I asked a question. I know for me, sometimes I remember this one session where a client asked me one question at the beginning, and something in me at the time just said, don't say a word, just be quiet.
Mm,
And the client kept talking, and was as if he was, with his words, going down a staircase from his mind to his heart. And
cool.
literally for like 20 minutes, he talked. And at the end, he took a deep breath and he goes, "Oh man, you're good." And I hadn't said a word. I hadn't said a word. And I just said, "Thank you."
Oh
And
man.
and so I think in those moments, at least for me, it is like surprising, because I have this thing inside of me that's like, I didn't do that. That was them doing the work.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's just, it feels a little bit like riding a bicycle with no handlebars. Like you've got some say in it, but you're not really totally in control.
Right. And that some of that magic, can happen. Like you said, you have the foundational skills. You know how to create that sort of safe container and that, trust in the relationship. And then from there, anything can happen. And I'm even thinking about, like, I think this may have been based in a real person, maybe in some capacity, not fully the way that it was fictionalized, but in there's a book called The Overstory, and there's a character in it who basically, can't remember if she has like a degree. I think she does, but she just sits across from the person. They come in and they spend, I don't know how long it is. I want to say it's hours, and they just make eye contact in silence for hours. And like, people pay all kinds of crazy money and wait on this huge long wait list to do this. And it's like, people say that it's just changes their life. And
This
of
is
course,
real?
again, that's a fictional, no, it's a
Oh,
fictional
okay.
book. But I did hear about an artist who did, this is where I say I think it might be based somewhat in real life. There was an artist who did like an experiential exhibit. I would have to look her up, in a museum somewhere, where she just for days or weeks stayed in this spot, and people would wait in line to just sit across from her and just make eye contact with her in silence. And so I don't know if there's
Hmm.
other uh, applications of this therapeutically, but I remember reading the book and just being like, wow, I could see how, if you know how to create that container and hold that kind of energy, how even that you're not
Yeah.
doing anything besides being fully present.
Which is tough.
Hmm.
What you were saying reminds me of a scene from Baby Mama, Tina Fey and Amy Poehler, where her boss is Steve Martin, and at some point she does something. And he grabs her by the shoulders and he says, "I'm going to reward you with 15 minutes of uninterrupted eye contact," and then just start staring.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah. I think that there's something about a person who can be fully present,
Hmm.
the connection that can be established, that in and of itself, without adding whatever content you want them to
Hmm.
add, that type of connection is healing and refreshing. And
Hmm.
a lot of times with my clients, as I try to talk to them about the importance of being in the here and now, we have to, they'll of course ask how. And so I try to get them to reverse engineer it and say, who in your life do you feel like when you are with them and then you leave their presence, that you have gotten something from just by being with them?
Mm,
And because I
it's a great
think that
question.
that in and of itself, even if that person's not like trained or an expert in
Hmm.
mindfulness or whatever, I think that they inevitably have some ability to be fully present and connect. And I think that that's where I try to start with folks and teach them how to be in the here and now, is like those kinds of people. Like think of those times that you're with them,
Mm,
and then try to like rip the back off the machine and see how it's wired.
yeah, that's great. I
So
love
let's
that.
talk about a movie.
Let's do it.
What movie did you bring for us to talk about today?
I brought Boyhood. And after rewatching it this week, I am so excited to talk about it.
So I've said this a few times on the podcast before. I keep trying to be intentional enough to where this doesn't happen, but it happened again. We planned on watching the movie last night. It's like 8:45 and I go to hit play and Leanne says, "How long is this thing?" And I go, "I don't know. Let's see." 2 hours and 45 minutes. And I was like, no. And I
That's
just looked at her
great.
and said, "I'll watch it tomorrow." When I got up this morning is when I hit play, which I guess I shouldn't really be surprised. The movie took 12 years to shoot, so I shouldn't really
Right.
be surprised that it's almost 3 hours long.
Yeah,
Um,
it's painful to send that much to the cutting room floor when you're filming annually for 12 years.
yeah, I can't even imagine. I was on IMDb's page for it earlier today and looking at some of like in the trivia section. And it
Mhm.
said that there's a law in California that you can't require an actor to sign on to a project for more than 7 years. And so technically any of those actors could have left like after the first 7 years,
Yep.
and they would have had to have done something about that. And it also said that Richard Linklater asked Patricia Arquette to not get any plastic surgery over the
Mhm.
course of the 12 years because her character, it wouldn't have been something that she would have done.
Right. Yeah, you can even see, I remembered, of course, watching it this time when like taking notes and being like really aware more so than the first time I watched it. There were things that I picked up on, like one scene where she's clearly pregnant, but the character's not pregnant. But it's like you
Mm.
can't tell, they like the characters went through marriages and divorces and having children like through the filming of this movie. And what I think is so cool too that you probably read about is, they didn't start this thing with a finished script. They kind of started and then like,
Mm.
Linklater would review the previous year's stuff and then work on the script of what happens next. And he would integrate like what's going on in these actors' lives. And he would bring them into like the writing process because, you couldn't have written Mason to turn out to be some preppy kid because that's not who Eller Coltrane was growing up
Mm.
to be. So, and I just am so blown away by that filmmaking process. I mean, there's the content itself of the film, but the filmmaking process is just really incredible.
I was kind of wondering, which I think this is a weird thing on like a regular movie or TV show, but how they pitched to this little boy to take this role on. Like, it's not just like, "Hey, do you want to be in a movie?" But like, "Hey, what are you doing for 12 years?
Yeah, right.
Do you
Yeah,
wanna
and
do
like
you
who
want us to follow you around and like every year come and we'll film you for a couple days and then that'll be that?"
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's such a gamble of like who knows? Like is this kid going to lose interest, and you got to hope that like the parents are like, on board and the kid's really on board. And another thing on the trivia, you might have seen that Linklater's daughter plays the sister. And
Mhm.
at one point after the first couple of years, she's like, Dad, I'm so over this. Can you kill my character? And he's like, no, that's like too dark. That's not where we're going. And she eventually
Mhm.
got back into it. But yeah, it is really, really fascinating. And I think Linklater also, like, a lot of this was filmed in Texas, and he started the Austin Film Society, which by the way, I was a radio TV film major at the University of Texas in my undergrad. But
Nice.
so he started the Austin Film Society in the mid 80s, and he just has, he just has a reputation and a mystique about him. So I'm sure that these families, like the family of this kid, like probably respected him and his work and were
Hmm.
like, all right, let's do this.
Is Linkletter like based around that area?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
because I know
I think,
Robert Rodriguez is too,
yep.
and he's somebody where I don't necessarily love most of the movies that he puts out, but I'm incredibly like transfixed and fascinated by his process, and
Hmm.
especially like after I read his profile in Tim Ferriss's Tools of Titans, where he talked about some of the ways that he thinks and some of the reasons why he makes choices that he does in making his films. And
Hmm.
he just has become this guy that is, I want to do it myself, even if that means I can't stand on top of the mountain. It's more
Right.
rewarding if I do it myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. They're sort of our two biggest filmmakers, I guess. And I'm sure there's younger people who've come along that I don't know of as well. But yeah, and I think that with Linklater, it's really neat because, you know, he's known for a lot of these films that take place, like the whole film happens within a 24-hour time period. So it's less like plot driven and more like, you know, showing real organic conversation and character development in through this, you know, through this arc of the film. And so then to have a story that takes place over, you know, compared to 24 hours over 12 years is just, it's just really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It looks like he's also, I guess in a little bit of a Scorsese sense, like once he finds actors and teams that he likes working with, he tends to keep them in his stuff.
Yep. Yeah. And I read that he even told Ethan Hawke, like, hey, if I die before this thing is done, you have to finish it.
Oh man. So we talked a little bit about it, but what is it about this movie that made you want to talk about it?
I mean, I think in addition to just the fact that it is a I think a work of filmmaking genius, um, just the interactions on screen, the relationships, the very real um, depiction of family dynamics and you know, destructive relationship patterns. Like
Hmm.
there's so much there, and like I kept writing all these like quotes and stuff from the movie, but just seeing those relationships and familial and some friendships like that to me is what makes this such a great movie.
Yeah, I remember thinking after I got done with it this morning, I think that it's just as much his parents' story as it is
Mm-hmm.
his. And I actually I don't think I hadn't heard that he integrated some things that were happening in real life over the course of the decade plus into the movie. But I mean, I had read that both Ethan Hawke and Patricia Arquette went through divorces and remarriages and had, you know, kids with the new marriage like while this was going on. And I didn't know, the only thing I knew about this movie when I hit play was the kind of process stuff, the length of time that it
Mm-hmm.
took. I didn't really know anything about the plot.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that Patricia Arquette had won the Oscar for it. Um, but that's it. And so I think one of the things that I've noticed over the course of doing the show now for 80 plus episodes is the I don't have a better word for it. The speed of story has changed in movies as we've gotten into like more modern stuff. So I think the oldest movie that I've had is Network, I want to say, from like 74, 76. Um, no, I think One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is like a year older than that. We did that one too. But like if you look back into, well, the 70s is the oldest I've done on the show, but especially if you go towards the 60s too, it really felt like filmmakers set characters and relationships up at the beginning and then kind of knew, of course this wouldn't be literal, but kind of knew, okay, we're going to let this thing run for an hour and a half and just kind of let the
Mm-hmm.
characters breathe and kind of let them interact. Like one movie that we covered, oh my gosh, Shirley MacLaine, Terms of Endearment. Terms of Endearment felt like one where I couldn't tell you this is the central conflict, this is the driving force of this story, but I could tell you about every relationship. I could tell you about things that happened between characters. I just couldn't tell you a solid through line for the plot.
Mm-hmm.
Versus if we take like an Avengers movie, right? Like bad guy gets thing, messes stuff up, good guys have to get thing back and fix things. That's
Mm-hmm.
and these older movies, they had a little bit more room to breathe. And I feel like Boyhood is like a revisitation of that, where there's not really a central conflict that runs through the whole thing. There are many conflicts, many both MANY and MINI homonyms.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not really a big one. And I think I think I've been surprised doing this show because I assumed I would have thought movies like that were boring. Kind of getting like used to living in this age of like the MCU and the Fast and the Furious movies where like everything's got to be moving all the time. And then
Right.
you show up to a movie like this, and the best word I have for it, and I said this about a couple of weeks ago about Lady Bird too, is it feels comfortable.
Mm.
Like it feels like lived in, like you can just plop down in the middle of the movie and be a part of it because it's so like, I guess, relational. It's so just characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, obviously, all of the like blockbuster, they don't try to hide the fact that they're fairly formulaic. And we know that works and we know it's entertaining. And some people, like my mom, would probably be bored to tears in most of those movies. And she will be into movies that are like probably a little too esoteric for me, that I'll just be like, that was weird. Um, and I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate uh films that where you can kind of slow down. Like I think of Mr. Rogers and just the value in that. And yet like it, the fact that things can be slow without being boring or dull. And
Mm-hmm.
especially as someone who, like, this is continuously my growing edge as a human, is I'm way overstimulated. I move way too quickly. I don't, even if I meditate, I'm like, check, done. I did my meditation. Like it's all about like, checking the boxes. And so I'm constantly working against that tendency. And to be able to just slow down, like you said, and get comfortable in a story like this, um, it's a really nice feeling that I think
Mm-hmm.
we are kind of losing, even not only in our fiction but in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, and I would imagine that's probably why, you can trace the style that these stories are told in from decades ago to now, as it's as culture, as all of us on the inside have kind of changed and gotten a little bit like more constricted and tighter. So has our
Mm-hmm.
storytelling.
Yeah.
So let's I mean get into it. So the movie, I think I read in the trivia thing that each year of the boy's life is represented by about 14 minutes on screen, and that it
Mm-hmm.
starts when he's, I think, 7, something like
Yeah.
that. Um I don't know where to start because I mean it feels like just talking about somebody's life.
Right. I mean, even the conversation we were just having about like slowing down and pace of life and all of that, like that's the kind of conversation that you would hear Mason having with his girlfriend,
And he kind
like
of
the
did when
main
they were in the
character.
truck. Yeah.
Yeah. I
About
mean,
him wanting to
he's
delete his Facebook.
right. So he's, and the privacy and like, of course, even though that was only like 2014 or, maybe 2010, 2012, when those conversations were being filmed, obviously just we're continually moving in that direction of AI and all of this stuff. And so I love that those conversations are baked in of like life philosophy. And I think any good writing and acting also shows the complexity of human beings, right? Rather than like all bad or all good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think of like, and I, I could only tolerate 3 seasons of Game of Thrones, but like Tyrion Lannister, like somebody who's like, yes, this person is multi-layered. Um, and for instance, like Ethan Hawke's character, the dad, Mason Sr., it's like you first kind of see him as this like absent father, classic, like
Mm-hmm.
comes around with the presents, and you kind of want to write him off as this like Peter Pan. And in some ways he is, and that's the phase of life that he's in. But through time, we see how he shows up, and we see those other layers of him and the work that he does put into being a dad and to growing as a person. And it's no longer easy to just put him in that box.
Mhm. Yeah, he shows up, I think originally, black band t-shirt, ripped jeans, GTO, and then in the end, khakis, button up blue Oxford shirt that's tucked in, like talking about, you guys are gonna make it to the baptism, right? Driving a minivan, and they even ask him like, so this is her car, and you still drive the GTO? That's how, and he's like, no, 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 this one's mine. This is what I drive.
Right.
And it
Yeah,
it
he
is
says
a
to Mason, like, I think I finally became the castrated, like, man that your mom always wanted to be 15, 20 years ago.
mhm. Yeah, and that's another thing that I think I was so transfixed on was the mom's journey,
Mm,
because I think as it starts, it's clear she's single, she has these 2 kids, but she's still trying to work on herself, and I never really got, they may have said it, if it was, she dropped out of college or never went to college. But I know that later on, when Ethan Hawke is having, I guess, the talk with his kids, he says, hey, we weren't really careful when we were having sex. We were 23, and I want you guys to not miss out on stuff, that we missed out on. So maybe it was just that, pregnancy and having a family interrupted her plans, but she's going to school while still parenting her kids and with help from her mom. Um, but then, they're sitting in her, I guess, psychology classroom. And that was interesting too, is to be in these classrooms where you see like John Bowlby's name on the board and they're talking about attachment theory. And I
mhm.
wondered if that was on purpose, because one of the things that I kept thinking throughout the whole movie was attachment theory and family systems.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it was funny. One thing I sort of caught, and I would almost have to watch it again to be more specific. But when they first show her as the student in the classroom at U of H of the jackass she ends up marrying,
The
he's
professor.
talking about, yeah, he's
Mhm.
talking about like behaviorism and not, operant conditioning and all of that. And then when she's the professor, when you see her later in her own classroom, and she's talking about like, oh, and this is what we thought was going on, and then but now we know this, like we know. And it was kind of the
Mhm.
evolution of psychology, and which was neat,
Yeah,
paralleling like
and she was
her
talking about
evolution
attachment
as a
theory.
human. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she was the one that had Bowlby up there. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I kinda wonder if that, shift in, understanding how people work, which, I mean, that's psychology in a nutshell, was reflected in the type of person and the ways that he related the professor did.
Mm,
Because whenever they got married, I think it just is a scene of him semi sort of either asking her out or them exiting the classroom talking about going on a date. And then kind of the next thing is, you see some balloons and streamers and they're getting back from their honeymoon. And he has 2 kids that he brought to the marriage. She has 2 kids, boy and girl both.
mm-hmm.
Um, and then you see him go to the liquor store one day, and then, you kind of see him drinking more. And then you see abuse introduced into the system.
Right. And I think that they did that in a really powerful and true kind of way because, his kids even are like after that episode of violence at the dinner at the like the dining room table, and they're talking, the 4 of the kids, and they're like, has he ever done this before? And they're like, no, like he's yelled. But I mean, and that's the thing, right? It's progressive.
Mhm.
And so that's the frog that's put in water. Like Olivia didn't sign up for that. It got worse and worse and worse under their noses until it became dangerous.
Mhm. And there was even something before that. I think Mason and maybe his friend were riding bikes or something. They were coming up to the garage, and the garage door was half open, and his mom was on the ground, and you could
Yeah.
only see the stepfather's like waist down because he was on that kind of one step in the garage. And she bloody murder, screaming, "Get out of here, get out of here, get out." Because she
Mhm.
is just desperate to protect her kid from seeing this thing that she's caught up in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a part of me, when you were talking earlier about Mason Sr., Ethan Hawke, and his kind of character arc in the movie, there's a part of me that almost wanted to say, she in hers was like the antithesis of his. Like, she started kind of mature and went a little down, but that's not true at all. I think I
Mhm.
wanted that kind of symmetry. She just, which we could talk about why, but she picked a terrible person.
Mhm.
And that person devolved into something that I think what you said rings very true. She didn't sign up for. And
Mhm.
everything from he sent his son and stepson into the liquor store to cash a check so that he could then, get more liquor. And he keeps actually, I don't know what he was drinking. I assumed it was vodka because he put Sprite in with it, but he kept it on the very, very top shelf behind,
Mm.
I think, laundry detergent or something
Yep.
to hide
Hidden.
it.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that was right before, I think that was right before the dinner table scene where
Yeah.
he threw
Yeah.
um, but at one point, like mom gets out of there. And then
Right.
he gathers the kids on the couch, asking about their texts and voicemails. Where is she? Do you know where she is? I was like, scared watching these
Mhm.
scenes.
Yeah.
Um, for these kids, I mean, for the mom does show back up and grabs the kids and gets out of there. Doesn't take any stuff. I mean, it was very much like a earthquake. You just grab the most important stuff and you get out of there moment.
Yeah. And then so sad about like, they've lived now for years with these other two kids who are still in danger. And she's like, listen, I tried to reach their mom. I called Child Protective Services, but like they just have to leave these kids who are like siblings. And again, I think that's just shitty, but like real life. And like she said, it would have been kidnapping if she'd not gone through the proper channels and like reported it as she did. And then of course it's also real life, but sad that we as the viewers never find out what happened to them.
Yeah. That was another thing about this movie that I think was so interesting to see the story do is it doesn't always give you closure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's something I know in my life when I was a client on the couch and then in my life now as a therapist, sometimes that's something that people want so badly that by holding on to it, they can't move forward.
Right.
It's a bit like putting your hand on a wall and saying, I really want to leave the house, but I'm not going to take my hand off this wall.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said, depending on the context, for having some kind of internal experience of closure. But keyword internal, right? Like occasionally that can involve another human, or maybe it's just involves some kind of ritual and an internal process because we don't get to know.
Mhm.
We don't get that like final conversation that like ties up the loose ends. Like that's occasionally happens, but it's not the norm. And one of the other places we didn't get closure in this movie is like, so this the second stepdad who talk about like just so sad. We see him initially at this like party, with university colleagues and stuff, and he's vibrant, he's
Was he a
youthful.
colleague? I thought he was a student.
I think he was there were colleagues there. I think he might have been a student,
Because I
but
thought that symmetry
or
was interesting
TA or
too.
something.
Yeah,
Right. There's maybe.
her first
Hmm.
marriage was a professor, her second marriage was a student.
Yeah. So maybe so. I don't know that they were totally explicit, but I think you're probably right. Um, but he's vibrant. He's talking about like having tried to like do his very best to be an ethical soldier in Iraq and like all of this. And that like, wow, like, oh, he seems to be like doing okay for like a fresh war vet. But then, time takes its toll. And we see in the, flash forward in a few years later, like he's become this sort of like jaded corrections officer, which talk about another career layering on top of military. Like, no wonder he's kind of got this power trip mentality. And yet like, he's trying, like even that painful scene where like Mason comes home late and he's sitting there drinking all these beers on the porch and like, this is my house. And like, he doesn't get I mean, he gets a little verbally aggressive. He doesn't get abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And and he's got his corrections uniform on, and you're just like, man, this guy like has not gotten the help he needed. And this is just a progression of like PTSD and working within toxic systems and not addressing, emotions that he's now numbing.
Mm-hmm.
And then that, of course, that relationship doesn't last either, but we never really see the dissolution of it. We
Mm-hmm.
just, there it goes. There's another one.
Yeah, I kind of imagined, because I think the next scene that we see is Mason in the kitchen. His mom's at the table with what looks like a bunch of bills, and she just kind of
Mm-hmm.
drops in there. I think I'm going to put the house on the market, and I kind of assumed that was
It was just
like
her then. Mm-hmm.
either that or that was her kind of letting him know, I'm going to be moving on from this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in that second husband, I think the entire time watching him, I felt a little clench because I was so scared after the first one of what this one could do. And in that scene that you were talking about, and that wasn't the first time that he had talked to Mason about coming home late either. And that kind of ramped up my fear even more. And it seemed like he was either drunk or half asleep when he was talking to him. I realized later on in the scene he was drunk, but then when he kind of turned and I saw the corrections officer embroidered badge on his shirt, I actually thought, oh no, like,
Mm-hmm.
because I just assumed he was going to get rough with him. And listen, I mean, maybe that's a bias getting uncovered right there for me, but it is interesting, to hear you talk about the progression, because, there's even scenes earlier where Mason Sr. and his, I guess, new wife and baby show up, and he's like thanking second husband
Mm-hmm.
for getting Mason Jr. a camera and like recognizing that he has this passion and wanting to invest in him. And you can tell like second stepdad is like, yeah, I mean, he's talking about wanting to have a dark room, and he's got skin in the game. But I think to what you said earlier, people are complex. They can't be reduced to one thing. They can't be simplified to one thing. And so it is possible for somebody to be engaged and yet also have their own stuff that they need to work on, and they get the chance to do that work. And if they don't, then it will have consequences.
Right. And the longer that work goes undone, the more that whatever it is progresses, and you just see the life like sucked out of him by the
Yeah.
last time that we see that guy. And it's like, even though he didn't start that way, again, like Olivia didn't sign up for that guy, but it's still like, I think of sometimes in relationship patterns, like, well, I would imagine maybe there were some red flags even early on. I mean, he's a military vet. He's, what did his drinking look like at the beginning of the relationship? Who knows? But hey, next to her ex-husband, the guy who was down the line alcoholic, this guy looks pretty great, and
Yeah.
that's where we get into this weird like relative thing. And it's like, just because someone's not your abusive ex doesn't mean that they're like a healthy human who's like done the work that they need to do. There's an author that I love who writes a lot about relationships, and he's like, you meet someone at a party, you like them, hand them your therapist card and say, call me in 2 years.
I like that. I like that.
Right.
I could have imagined, the mom saying something along the lines of, well, at least this one doesn't hit me. And then
Exactly. Right.
like having to say like, well, that's a pretty low bar. Like if
Yeah.
that's all it takes is this guy doesn't get, physically abusive with me. that particular actor that played the second stepdad, I was taking a little bit out of the story because I had to check on IMDb, but he was in this show that I used to watch in middle school called VR Troopers, which was like a Power Rangers ripoff.
Nice.
And I remember seeing him and going like, I've seen that guy. Is that the guy from VR Troopers? And I had to look him up, and it was.
That's great.
Yeah, but I think that he did have, in that first scene that he was in, he had this light in his eyes where he was talking about our unit didn't lose any guys over there, and we did everything we could to develop relationships with the local people that we were in the middle of. And then when we left, the next unit that came in lost, I think, 7 guys in the first month or something. He just had this, you could tell he was present. And then towards the end, you could tell that he wasn't. And I think something that brings to mind, and I hope that this isn't like me projecting, but it brings to mind, I think that sometimes we as humans can imagine, when I get fill in the blank, when I get X, I will have arrived and I will be satisfied. And I could see maybe Patricia Arquette's character, which, by the way, I am terrible, Olivia, with character names. I've got IMDb pulled up like on another tab that I'm like trying to check. But I could see Olivia thinking, well, if I can just find the right man, everything will work out. And I know that in the past, before I even got to therapy, I remember thinking, well, if I could find the right person, my life will be great. And, we could unpack that forever. But maybe this guy had the mindset of, well, now I've arrived and I don't have to continue to plumb the depths. I don't have to continue developing my intrapersonal relationship. I don't have to continue examining my feelings and thoughts. And I came across this in a book I'm reading right now. The author references another guy named Parker Palmer, who in his work talks about listening to your life. And he says that like and he also references John Hollis, who's a psychiatrist or psychologist, I don't know. But he says in times of instability and chaos, our ego wants stability, it wants regularity, and it will do everything it can to temp down the murmurings, the gentle murmurings of our heart. And I just kind of wondered if maybe that guy in some way thought, well, now I've got everything and I'm good. And so he turns on autopilot. And as he begins to cruise, of course, those things that are inside of him are crying out. They're trying to be heard.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, we do see Olivia, like you said, it's not exactly that she starts off like mature and has her shit together and then she like decompensates. It's just she's living life. She's experiencing life and pain and learning shit the hard way. And then we see her have these moments of like, oh, I thought there would be more, or I spent the first half of my life accumulating all this stuff and I'm going to spend the second half of it getting rid of all of it. Just these very human moments of like stepping back and reflecting on life. And that's, even if we have like great love and great joy and we've accomplished these things, like there's sometimes still that kind of like existential, like search for a deeper meaning.
Yeah, I think, I always tell my clients that the 2 things that are a part of every healthy life are reflection and intention. And so I think that even, which this type of person doesn't exist, but like the healthiest of people, at least from the outside, is still going to every now and then have to pick their head up above water and then kind of like look down and go, where am I? Look backwards and go, where did I come from? How did I get here? And then decide, where do I want to go? And so I think that those existential crises that you're talking about with her, it is these moments of like taking stock of, where am I at? And am I content in this situation or moment, or do I want something different? And I think both of those things are okay. I think it's okay to be content where you're at. I think it's okay to want something different. But I always encourage everybody, make sure you're the one that decides it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then there's the conversation that Mason is having with his girlfriend at one of my old late night Austin haunts, Magnolia Cafe,
Is that like
where
is that Chip and Joanna Magnolia, or is that something different?
no, no.
Oh, because they're Waco. That's right. Okay, sorry.
Yep, which is where my parents are originally from. So I've got all
Oh,
all of my Texas
oh,
roots
all
here.
right.
But yeah, Magnolia Cafe in Austin was one of our like 24-hour joints, with their queso is famous as it is in the movie.
Ooh.
But yeah, so they're sitting there talking and somehow his mom comes up and he says, like, basically she's still just as fucking confused as I am. And I have the sense, just in knowing, and Mason as we do, that's not necessarily a judgment of his mom so much as it is him realizing, like, this is what adulthood is like.
Yeah. And I think that reminds me of what I was speaking of earlier. You expect to arrive.
Hmm.
And I know that, like, for one of the ways that I conceptualized that was when I started therapy as a client, I thought there'd be a graduation date. Like, I thought a lot like high school or college, I would complete a certain amount of tasks or units or whatever. And then at some point, my therapist would look at me and maybe hand me a piece of paper, but shake my hand and say, "Congratulations, you're healthy." And I imagined that healthy person would be I wouldn't have conceptualized it this way then, but I would now, I guess. But like stoic, like I wouldn't be bothered or affected by anything because I would have this mastery over myself and this deep rooted understanding about why people do things and all this kind of stuff. And that's not what happened at all. That's
Yeah. Yeah. There's a quote that I think is probably just like a 12 step, but I heard it originally from this guy, Rich Roll, who has a great podcast and is in recovery. And he's like, yeah, you never like cross the velvet ropes and graduate from your humanity. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, my best friend who's also a therapist says that you expect at the end that you'll feel better, but instead you feel better. Like you expect
Mm,
that you'll always be happy, but what ends up happening is that your ability to experience and engage and communicate your emotions is increased. And so you actually feel more and not less, but now you know what's going on and you can engage with it. And I think
mm,
that's the truest thing that I've ever heard about the whole
mm,
process of not just therapy, but in becoming an adult. And I think that, like what you were saying, Mason's recognizing, I think in that moment, A, growing up is tough, and B, he's like humanizing his mom. He's
mhm,
realizing, and I think that's a moment that, gosh, every single one of us has where our parents stop becoming, I don't know about infallible, but I think that we
mhm,
expected them to be. And so they stop becoming what we thought they were. And
mhm.
all of a sudden they're just people.
Right. And I think what's neat about what we see, at least, of the parent-child relationship, especially with their mom, is like they figured that out pretty early on with
Mm.
her. But I don't think it made them lose respect for her. And even though she was clearly like working out some things and making some
Mhm.
mistakes throughout life, and uh, she was still always trying to do right by them and trying to prioritize them. And yeah, I think that even though they knew she was very human and made mistakes, that didn't make them lose respect for her.
I thought that she treated them with a great deal of respect,
Hmm.
and I thought was really, I can't think of another word, but humanizing. And I'm thinking of when Mason gets home late one night and she has people over, but he comes in and she's like, have you been drinking? And he's like, a little bit. Have you been drinking? And she's like, a little bit. And then she says, have you been? And she makes a motion of like a joint. And he said, a little bit. And I was picturing myself in that moment, probably panicking, being afraid. Oh my God, my kid came home and he's drunk and stoned. Oh my gosh. And she just kind of like, are you okay? Do you need to go sleep? But like, it just, and I can't decide whether that is relating to or treating him in a way that was not developmentally appropriate. Like if that was treating him like a peer instead of a parent, I can't decide if that was it or if it was this humanization and kind of respecting him as a person. And
yeah. And I feel like 15 is really hard. Plus it was his birthday, so he probably got a little more slack than he might have normally.
Oh yeah.
But that's a tough age because I do feel like at some point in that adolescent experience, and what did I hear? A way that I loved James Hollis actually describing adolescence as like, you can't control them. Like they are a force of nature. It is not about controlling your adolescent. Again, that doesn't mean that you have to just be like, fine, do whatever, but to recognize like if without enabling dangerous behavior, is there a way for you to make them comfortable enough to be honest and open with you? And I think that that's probably what was going on. But yeah. And there's another thing that you mentioned like a few minutes ago of like it's not about feeling quote better, but feeling better. And that reminded me of like after jumping around a little bit, after his high school graduation, when he's out with his dad at Antone's, just having a conversation before this show, and this is, which we'll get to this when we talk about my podcast later, but he says, so what's the point? And his dad's like, of what? Of any of it? And his dad says, well, we're all just winging it. The good news is you're feeling stuff. You got to hold on to that. And he's like, with time, like sometimes you don't feel as much. And I loved that answer.
Yeah. Which I think is the basis of, because I mean, my whole practice centers around helping people with sex addictions. And so I think the whole basis of recovery, that's what you're recovering. That's it.
Feelings.
It's your connection to yourself. It's your feelings. Because I remember asking, actually my same friend, many, many years ago, he was helping me process something. And I remember saying like, is there anybody that this comes natural to? And he just pointed at his daughter, who was like 2 at the time. He's like, yeah, her. He's like, when we get born, like we are fully engaged with ourselves, but then it gets ground out of us, be it by culture or be it by the people that are raising us aren't comfortable with themselves, and encountering our feelings causes more uncomfortableness in them, to where they kind of need to put a mute button on us. But that process of recovery is it's developing that relationship with yourself again, to where as you begin to learn healthy intimacy with others, that you have something to bring to the table. Which is that that thing that his dad was talking about. You're feeling, you got to hold on to that. That is life.
There was a great feeling word used that I had to write down too at one point, when he's like packing up his photos from the like contest, and the teacher comes over and basically, she's giving him this like encouraging message of like, you're going to do great. Like you got this, in college kind of thing. And she's like, how are you feeling? And he's like, oh, I don't know, like nervous, I guess, excited. And she goes, oh, that voluptuous panic. I was like, oh, yes. I love
that. Yeah. And then she walks away. I think she said, don't forget to floss or something like that.
Yes.
And I thought that's an interesting sign off.
Right.
Like as you're walking away from somebody. Yeah. This movie, and I think the last one that I really felt this way about was Lady Bird. But this movie, I just thought in its simplicity and in its comfortableness was just beautiful. And I think that I naturally feel like stories have to have beginnings and middles and ends and resolutions and conflicts that get resolved and overcome. But with this, it felt whole.
Yeah.
It felt whole because you really do feel like you saw a kid in his innocence encounter the world and other people who maybe unintentionally, but sometimes intentionally wanted to break him down. Like I'm thinking of those two boys in the restroom that were just jerks, spontaneous jerks for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
And you see him wrestle with that. And you kind of feel a blanket get put over him for a while. And then towards the end, you see his soul start to kind of wake up again. Mm. And it does, at least for me, make me kind of wonder, I want to know where he goes next.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting to think like whole, I mean, and this kid, his life, I doubt that Mason would have, especially at like 18, necessarily had the language to describe his upbringing as traumatic. But we know there was a hell of a lot of relational trauma in that movie, in his life experience. And yet, because, you know, well, he never got hit, he never, you know, so many of those things that like, had he had less support, had he had a mother who was also addicted or, you know, whatever, like any number of things had been different, he could have been like the, you know, 10th grader who they were hanging out with one night, his friend's older brother, who was like just spouting off all of this like rape culture stuff. Like he could have ended up like, what would that rest of that kid's life look like? It's just, that scene was so heartbreaking because
that was terrifying.
It was, and it showed peer pressure in such a realistic way. Like peer pressure is very much a thing.
Yeah, to hear him say it's not about what they want, it's about what you want.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a moment where you just want to grab Mason's arm and lead him out of the room. Like,
get out of here.
No, this isn't it. These guys aren't it. No, get out of here. And what's funny is like I was less concerned about them breaking boards and throwing saw blades at a piece of drywall than I was about that. It's not funny, but I mean, like I would rather them like, throw that saw blade. Great.
Sure.
Yeah, just respect women when you do it.
Seriously, yeah. So that's heartbreaking to know that. And I do think like in this era of Me Too, like hopefully there is more consciousness, more awareness than there was even when like that scene was shot in like 2009 or whenever it might have been. But we know that those conversations are real, you know?
Well, you know what's interesting about and speaking as a former teenage boys, is that I think it's tough sometimes for the listener, but even for the speaker to know how much of this is what you really think and how much of this is bravado.
Posturing, yeah.
But you know, and I said this to a client just the other day, the question, which, you know, hearkening back to your existential examinations in your youth, the question that got me into therapy that I was asking myself at the time was, what matters more, what I believe or what I do? And the answer that I arrived at after years was yes. And one side of that is what you do, because what you do reflects what you believe. And so if your actions don't match your beliefs, you should probably ask yourself, do you really believe that?
Right.
But I think the other answer to it is it's a lot like a snake eating its own tail or a chicken and an egg, because our actions inform our beliefs and our beliefs inform our actions. And so they're like tied together. So I kind of wonder, like, maybe that was bravado that kid was saying, but also if that kid keeps saying that kind of stuff, then he's going to come to believe it and internalize it.
Exactly. Like words have power.
Yeah.
And so, ultimately what we do perhaps matters the most, what we do and what we don't do. But yeah, we have to be very aware of the words that we use inside our heads and outside of our heads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, is there anything else in the movie that you want to touch on?
Well, I thought there was one. So I'm a big like prologue lover
Uh-huh.
because even though, like I've said, I appreciate stories like this or depictions like this that don't tie things up in bows, but then I also really love when things get tied up in bows. Like for instance, the prologue in the Harry Potter series, stuff like that. I'm just like, yes. Um, so I live for a good moment like that. And we get one of those moments with Ernesto, the guy who fix the pipe in her yard, and then she makes the comment like, you're smart, you should go to college, like you could do something
Mm-hmm.
else. And then he comes up to them in the restaurant and is like, you changed my life. And as much as that's like a nice like movie moment, again, things like that do happen. Our words
Yeah.
have power. And to think of like, if you're feeling something positive about someone, say it, because you
Mm-hmm.
never know the power that those words could have.
Yeah. And it really was this tiny interaction. And at the time, he was speaking broken English, but they were talking about this septic pipe. And when he comes up to them in the restaurant, he obviously looks like a grown man, clean shaven, very well dressed. And he says he's one of the managers at the restaurant, and you guys don't worry about the bill. It's on me. It's the least I can do. I kind of in that. So first off, like I was tearing up in that scene because it's a beautiful moment. And
Yes.
I'm glad that he got that. I'm glad that he had, because I know that that meant so much to him. It kind of looks like Olivia. I kind of expected her to be a little more affected by that than it looked like that she was.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. But then it's also like maybe real life of like, oh, like this like just totally caught me off guard. And do I remember this conversation? And like, just like you're in your head trying to like piece it together and just
Mm-hmm.
take in this like thing that's happening. But yeah, I like to think if that were me, I would be like in tears and like, oh my God, you're
Yeah.
amazing. Look at what you've done.
But I do think it's interesting, like, uh, it's different. Like if a client expresses to you their appreciation as you're ending your therapeutic relationship, you've been very present that whole time. Versus like in that was like a moment where maybe she just came outside to say something and went back inside and was living her life, and it had this profound effect, but an unintentional one.
Yeah.
And like I had the chance last year, I got to interview Chip Dodd on the podcast, and like his book Voice of the Heart was the first book that was recommended to me when I entered into therapy, and I still use the framework with all of my clients now. And I told him, like, you changed my life, and because of that, every client that I work with, you're changing theirs. And I think he was probably experiencing something similar, because like we just didn't have a personal connection, like a relationship. And he wrote this thing, I don't know when it was, 20 years ago or whenever, that's still, out there working on people. And all of a sudden, one of those people's in front of him saying, thank you. And thank you. Yeah, great. I'm glad.
Right.
Good.
I'm so glad. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tell me about something that your clients have taught you.
I think the biggest thing or that comes to mind or comes to the surface right now is that whatever the thing is that you might be scared to look at or to address, you will not regret doing it. And that's just so true every time. Like, even clients who like end up telling, like, I've been working with them for a year, and then all of a sudden they're like, I've wanted to tell you this for a long time. And I always tell myself, like, today is going to be the session. And then I don't. And then they've done it, then they've said it, and it's just like, oh, that's such a relief. Like you're never going to regret just bringing it.
Do you ever
And
get those
that's,
in the last 5 minutes of a session?
oh, absolutely. Gotta love a good doorknob, right? But yeah, I mean, and I've experienced that to be true myself. And it's funny how it's like, even though I've seen it a million times professionally and I've experienced it, many years ago, there are things that I've been working through, and it's like, oh yeah, that's true for me too. Can't forget that. Like,
Mm.
uh,
Yeah, even as therapists, we haven't arrived.
mm-hmm.
We're just people.
Exactly.
Yeah, we got a bad case of being a person. Um,
Uh,
the good news is it's a really inclusive club. Bad
right.
news is it's
Exactly.
terminal. You're going to die a person.
Right. I think that's my favorite thing about memes. Like, I love being alive in the time of the meme because memes are just so good at conveying the universal human experience. You know,
Yeah.
they're just like so brilliant in these like few silly words or images. It's like, oh my God, yes, this.
Which I think for anybody that's ever been involved in recovery, it's kind of filled with memes in the sense of there's just a million like simple, pithy sayings.
Yep.
And what's funny is like I in having had a chance to learn about and know a lot of them, I had never really thought about why that is. And my first guest this year said, because when your anxiety is at its peak, you need something simple that you don't have to search in your brain for. You need something
Yeah.
that can just like pop up and there it is and you can take an action on it.
Yep.
And I
First thought
thought,
wrong. If that's all I can remember, I've got it.
do the next right thing. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Um, I wonder what's something that you do to take care of yourself.
Well, right now, 6 months into the pandemic and social distancing, um, you can
Oh my
see
gosh,
behind
you're
me on the
right.
video
I'm
this
having a little bit of a. I just realized it has been 6 months. Oh wow.
6 months, 6 whole months. Yep.
Yeah.
So I recently, just like a week ago, got this treadmill in here. I've been going, I'm very fortunate to have a neighborhood that is beautiful to walk in. And so I'm going lots of walks. And
Mhm.
then I think there's like this, I mean, I'm already kind of a restless person as it is, but with the, not taking my body out into the car and driving around and like doing all the things of normal life, I think I need that even more. And so on days where it's been too oppressively hot and humid or like raining, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I can't go for a walk. It's like so uncomfortable too. So I was like, finally broke down and got myself an inexpensive treadmill because I'm like, I got to keep walking. Like, I cannot be on the phone if I am not
Yeah.
walking. So walking has been everything.
I'm the same way. I pace on the phone. I also I pace when I read.
I do that
Like
sometimes, like
I
holding my iPad, like,
yeah, I started it in grad school because you got to read so many textbooks and it's sitting still for so long I'd fall asleep. So I started walking laps in the house and it's not unusual that even now if I'm reading in the mornings I'll hit the outdoor workout or whatever on my watch and it'll tell me I walked a mile as I'm
that's
reading.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that makes a lot of sense. And this has come up on the show the past couple of weeks. You know, physical activity like that, it is impossible to do that and not be present in your body. Like
Hmm.
I know my first experience of that was whenever I lived in San Diego. This was in like '05. I moved down there and a month later, the girl I was dating and I broke up. And I was like devastated because I was in a new town, new job, no friends, like and
Rough.
the boss that I had, he was a surfer. He bought me a surf lesson. And I remember going out into the water. And then when I was coming out of the water, an hour, however long later, one of these moments that I think everybody has when they go through a breakup, when you realize, oh, I didn't think about him
Yeah.
during that time. And
Uh-huh.
it's at both, it's at the same time, like healing and refreshing, but then also, oh crap, now I'm thinking about him.
Right.
Those kinds of moments. But that was my kind of first experience of that. And so I think that like right now, whenever I ask that question to people and they say, is it weird that I say riding my bike? Is it weird that I say hiking? Is it weird that I say going for a walk? I'm like, no, because it's putting you in your body. It's causing you or inviting you, I should say, to be in the here and now,
Mm-hmm.
which I said to somebody the other day, you can either be connected to yourself and the person you're with, or you can be connected with the world
Right.
through, you know, everything on our smartphone or the news or whatever. You can't do both at the same time. So to be
Mm-hmm.
doing something that invites you back into yourself and connects you and grounds you, that makes so much sense
Right.
as something to take care of yourself.
Yeah. And I think like anything, I mean, in having worked so much with eating disorders and having been through my own reckoning of like reclaiming my relationship with movement.
Hmm.
Like that is a thing. Like some people, it sucks, but some people are at a place with movement where like it owns them and it feels like, oh, exercise is this like, self-punishing thing I have to do to earn my calories. And it's like,
Hmm.
that's a rough spot to be in, because then it's like one of your greatest resources as a human is something that is like hurting you. But if anybody relates to that, either past or present, just to know that like you absolutely can reclaim your relationship with movement. And it's so worth doing.
Yeah. Right now on my practices Instagram page, I'm going through a couple of different definitions of addiction.
Mm.
So starting with like Merriam-Webster's, and then I think this post comes out sometime this week, but using Patrick Carnes's definition. But my favorite is actually going to come from, next week's going to come from Russell Brand, the comedian, because he
Yeah.
has a book called Recovery. And anybody that I end up talking to about addiction or recovery, I tell them about this book because it's just the best book on it. Like I've read a
Mhm.
lot of, this is the best one. And his definition of addiction is when natural biological imperatives like the need for food, sex, relationship, relaxation, or status become prioritized to the point of destructiveness. And I
Mm.
like that definition because it takes you outside of substance or process, and it makes you realize, oh, I can be addicted to anything if I've moved it so far up on the priority list that it wrecks everything else.
Right.
And I think that speaks to me in what you were talking about, a person's like, I guess overcommitment to movement or something. Like
Mhm.
when it's being destructive in your life, that's something that you got to take a look at.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
luckily for me, it feels good at this point in my life.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. Leanne and I, we live not too far down from a state park. And so we've made a habit of on the weekends, we go down there and there's a 2-mile trail and we do that loop and come right back home.
Cool.
And I think at the beginning she was dragging me to do it. And a lot of that was based on, me constructing these worst case scenarios of like, we're going to get infected when we pass somebody on the trail. Oh my God, but now it's something that I look forward to as well because of that. Like it puts me in my body. Like it's really good to not have to be connected to the world through a screen and just to do
Yeah.
something in the moment. Um,
Mhm.
so let's say that somebody was listening to today's show and they think to themselves, oh my gosh, I love Valerie. I think I can really connect with her. I'd love to be her client. How can they get a hold of you to do that?
Yeah, probably the best thing is to just head to my website, which is GaiaCenter.co. Gaia, like the Earth Mother. So that's my therapy website. And then I have a different website for like my other non therapy stuff. So, like my podcasts and all of the other things that I do. One of my podcasts, longer form interview thing, I do less frequently now just because folks have tons of great long form podcasts like this to listen to. We can only listen to so much, but I did just recently have a new episode come out on that one that's really, really good. And that podcast is called What's the Effing Point? Because you can't have a curse word in the title of your podcast on Apple. But yeah, so what's the F star 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 ing point? Um, and that's at my website, valeriekmartin.com. My other podcast is a every weekday short form, like 5 minutes, and it's called Recharge, and it's just intended to like be a thing that gets you energized and aligned for your day. So, if
Wow.
you're like me and you're like, well, shit, I used to listen to podcasts and now I don't ever get in the car. So I'm not listening to almost all my podcasts I normally do. Well, 5 or 10 minutes on your morning walk or whatever, you can listen to Recharge.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
Um, yeah, I was talking to somebody yesterday about, they were like, is there a normal length? And I was, and I was like, well, the way that I listen to podcasts is I do it in little chunks, however long it takes me to drive there, or when I'm
Mhm.
washing the dishes in the morning, or if I walk the dog. So I never think about, I bet somebody's not going to listen past this certain time because I always just hit play,
Yeah.
but I also know that since the pandemic, both as a host of a podcast, my listener numbers have gone down a little bit, but also as a listener, I've seen quite a few shows that I absolutely love with my whole heart pile up in my queue. And some of that's what you're saying, no commute, but some of it's because I've started listening to audiobooks like it. So it's,
Yeah.
so I think to have both of those resources, like both long form for like educational something, but also you need those little bits of inspiration. You need those little bits of motivation that can like propel you into the day.
Totally.
That's
Yeah. So I kind
important.
of created the thing that I wanted. And then one other thing, well, two things, I guess. I do have an intern who is joining me like next week in my practice. She's incredible. Her name is Colleen Warner. And so her info is on my website too. And she has a couple more spots remaining.
Ooh.
And then I also am currently, this is not available for sign up now, though I will be running it again at some point. I'm in the middle of running a 6-week course called What the Fuck is Happening? That is about like helping people cultivate the resilience and grace and grit to face these crazy, unprecedented times. And it's really fun. I'm really enjoying it.
Holy cow. Tell me more about it. You said 6 weeks. Are we
Yeah.
talking group therapy? Are we talking psychoeducation?
Nope. I'm calling it psycho-spiritual mentoring. So some people are clients of mine, coaching or therapy. Some people are friends or acquaintances. And it's like a lesson that I'm doing each week. You can come live or catch the recording, a meditation I record for each week, and a play sheet. And so far, we've talked about self-regulation. We've talked about spirituality as a resource. Tonight, we're talking about grief and glowing in the dark, being able to celebrate even when shit is hard. So,
Holy cow. So needed right now.
yeah, it's
Wow.
fun.
So I'm imagining closed group and then a lot like when you sign up for your insurance at your job, like at the end of one term, it opens up again to.
Yeah. So I'm not sure exactly when I'll reopen it for enrollment, but if you follow me on Instagram or, get on my like email list, then you will find out.
What's the Instagram handle?
VALKAY Martin, Val K. Martin.
Boom.
Yeah.
Valerie, I can't even begin to say how much I appreciate you and you just giving your time to talk about this today. It's been an absolute crazy pleasure. And hopefully at the end of all of this, once we've made it through, hopefully I'll get a chance to meet you in person.
I hope so. And I so appreciate this because I can't imagine, other than maybe my husband who rewatched this with me this week, sitting down and forcing someone to like talk about it with me for a full hour plus was just such a joy. So
I
thank you. And I
know.
hope that people who listen, who hopefully will have watched the movie before, will also really enjoy digging into the depth of it.
Oh yeah. And if you haven't seen it, go see it.
Yes.
It's
So
on
good.
iTunes. Just rent it. Well, Val, thank you so much and can't wait for round 2.
All right. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks so much for joining me this week in the theater. I'll make sure I save a seat for you and a friend next week. Let's raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.